Hello, everyone. My name is Jose, and today I will be talking about the great Thomas de Quincey and his autobiography, Confessions of an English Opium Eater. First, a question for the audience. What if the thing that destroys you is also what fuels your greatest creativity? Would you acknowledge you have a problem? Could you even do so? Would you walk away from it forever, or would you continue down the path to satisfy your artistic ambitions? Well, De Quincey, who was renowned for writing the first literary memoir centered on drug use, embodied this paradox. His dependence on opium was both a disadvantage, curse, and a wellspring of inspiration that fueled his creativity. Born August 15, 1785 in Manchester, England, he grows up during a time of tremendous changes, from the Industrial Revolution to the rise of Romanticism. De Quincey was raised on a strict, affluent household, but experienced early trauma, including the loss of his father at an early age of 7. Lived with his mother, who had a strained relationship with throughout his life, he really didn't want to stay where he was. Although he was a talented student, he did not feel at home in the structured environment of school. He went to top schools, including Manchester Grammar School, but became unhappy with the system. At the age of 17, seeking more freedom to explore his intellectual interests, he ran away. He fled to London, intending to escape his family's control and to live independently. However, his time in London was far from easy. He was young, penniless, and inexperienced, and he struggled to make a living. De Quincey later recalled the emotional and physical hardships he endured during this time, including homelessness, extreme hunger, and the sense of overwhelming loneliness. In 1803, he headed to Oxford University, where he showed great promise, but his time there was overshadowed by his growing opium addiction. De Quincey first takes opium in 1804 to relieve the excruciating pain of a severe toothache. And those who've had toothaches, you know how bad it can get. He continued to use the drug occasionally to manage pain or stress, but over time he developed an addiction. In his later years, Thomas de Quincey still struggled with his opium addiction, but he kept writing prolifically. He lived mostly in the Lake District, though his financial situation was often tough, with many debt and a lot of people looking for him and trying to get their money back. His personal life was not easy either. He dealt with depression from just everything that had happened to him. And then in 1837, the loss of his daughter, which hit him pretty hard. Despite everything, De Quincey kept contributing to literature, authoring essays and critiques on a variety of topics. His health continued to decline due to his addiction, and he passed away on December 8, 1859, at the age of 74 in Edinburgh. Okay, let's now move on to one of his most famous works, which is Confessions of an English Opium Eater. First published in 1821, it is a part memoir, part philosophical exploration, and it gives readers an intimate look at the author's experience with opium addiction. De Quincey, who was in his late teens at the time, began using opium to cope with chronic pain. And this book dives deep into the highs and lows of his addiction and the people around him during his life. What makes Confessions stand out is how it blends personal experience with vivid and sometimes poetic reflections. The Quincey does not just talk about the physical effects of opium, he also explores the emotional and psychological side of it, like the strange and often disturbing dreams that he had, as well as his thoughts on memory, perception, and consciousness. His writing paints a picture of the extreme euphoria that came with opium use, but also the terrible lows, the depression, the paranoia, and the constant craving of more. The book itself is structured as a confession, where the Quincy admits his dependence on opium while reflecting on the impact it had on his life at the time. Opium was not widely stigmatized, as it would become later in later years, but it was still seen as dangerous and immoral by many. The Quincy's willingness to be so open about his struggle made Confessions both shocking and fascinating to readers. What was very interesting is that while De Quincey is clearly troubled by his addiction, he also seems to find some kind of strange beauty in the experience. His writing, full of vivid imagery and deep philosophical musings, turns his addiction into something almost poetic, something that us, like the readers, might want to experience. And for the first time, addiction was not just seen as a moral failing, but something that could be examined through literary and intellectual lens. Confessions also had a substantial impact on the Romantic literary movement. It influenced writers like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, who were part of the movement, and it opened the door for more exploration in the when they're talking about the altered states of consciousness in literature. De Quincey's work showed that addiction, pain, and human vulnerability could be subjects of serious literary exploration, not just things that we should be ashamed of or hide away. Ultimately, Confessions of an English Opium Eater is not just about addiction. It's about the human experience and how we deal with suffering, how we deal with pleasures, and the blurry line between them. The book still holds relevance today as it offers insight into mental health, addiction, and the ways in which people grapple with their inner worlds. Confessions also teach us about the seductive yet dangerous nature of addiction, showing how something that starts as pleasure can turn into a powerful and destructive dependence. It also gives us insight into the working of the mind, especially how memory, dreams, and perception can be altered by substances. Beyond that, it encourages deep self-reflection, making us think about the fine line between escape and reality, pleasures and suffering. The book also reminds us the power of storytelling, how personal experiences no matter how dark, can be turned into something thought-provoking and meaningful. Now let's talk a little bit about how the Quincey's addiction was sort of a double-edged sword. His writing, especially Confessions of an English Opium Eater, gained him immediate attention. The book's candid portrayal of addiction was groundbreaking and caught the interest of readers and critics everywhere in London and other places too. This led to some fame and success, as well as opportunities to publish more works, including essays and reviews, and he started getting money out of this. However, despite his literary success, the Quincey never achieved financial stability in his life. Never. His addiction, constant health issues, and erratic work habits made it difficult for him to manage his income. He was often in debt and struggled to make a living, even as his literary reputation grew. As an adult, De Quincey accumulated more debt while trying to support his family and maintain a literary career at the same time. His addiction made it difficult to manage his finances, and he often borrowed money. To avoid being arrested for debt, since you could get arrested for debt back in those days, he sometimes had to go into hiding. One of the most notable places he stayed to evade creditors was in the rural Lake District, where he was close to poets like William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And despite his struggles, De Quincey continued writing and publishing essays, but his financial troubles followed him for most of his life. He even spent a brief period of time in something called debtor's prison, which reinforced the cycle of poverty and addiction that haunted him for the rest of his life. This place was kind of like a prison, but not really, because you could go out on Sundays. Specifically on Sundays, because the law stated that you couldn't be arrested for debt on Sundays. De Quincey's opium addiction, though, was both damaging and strangely beneficial to his writing. On the downside, it took a serious toll on his health, causing many stuff to happen to him, including like digestive issues and intense psychological distress. He became dependent on the drug, going through painful withdrawal cycles, and struggled with poverty because of his addiction. But in a twisted way, his addiction also helped him shape his unique writing style. The opium gave him access to deep, dreamlike states that fueled his creativity and allowed him to explore the human mind in ways few others did. His suffering, while tragic, contributed to the depth and intensity of his work, which left a long-lasting mark in literature. What are some of the impacts that he had in literature? Well, he influenced a lot of writers after him. His Confessions of an English Opium Eater even caught the attentions of people like Edgar Allan Poe, who was drawn to De Quincey's deep dive into the human mind and darker themes. Another author that was impacted by him or moved by him was Charles Baudelaire. He translated De Quincey's work into French, and he also was inspired to write his own work called The Flowers of Evil, which at the time was censored by the French government. Baudelaire had a lot of similar problems like De Quincey, going through poverty, going through health problems and going through addiction, which made him want to write in a similar style. To conclude this, I want to say that the Quincy's life was a mix of brilliance and struggle. The the drug that he consumed ended up consuming him. His life ended up. His addiction to opium cost him a lot of pain, but it also played a key role in shaping his unique writing style. His confessions opened up a new way of thinking about addiction and personal suffering in literature. Despite the damage it did to him, his experiences influenced countless writers and left a lasting impact in literary history. So I think it's worth to ask this question to the audience. Did his pain made him a better writer? Or could he have been just as great without it? Thank you very much for listening to my oral presentation, and I wish you all a great day and a great semester. Have a good one.